And so tonight we're going to talk about community. So before we get to that, those of you that have accessed the agenda, there is a quote. And this quote is by a gentleman by the name of Elton Brown. And the quote says, "Evangelism aims to take fish where they did not plan to go. But we should seek to convert without resorting to bait and switch." So he says evangelism aims to take human fish where they did not plan to go, but we should seek to convert without resorting to bait and switch. What does that mean? Either part of it, because both parts are packed.
I like but we should seek to convert without resorting to bait and switch. We don't tell people, if you come to Christ, we're going to give you this. But then once you get into it and they still have problems, you're like, hey, I didn't tell you that your life was going to be. So that's, to me, it's like a bait and switch. You're promising them the world, that your troubles are going to be gone and everything's going to come up roses. And then when their life takes a turn, to me, that's like a bait and switch.
Anybody else? What about that first part? That evangelism aims to take people where they did not plan to go. What do you think about that?
When I look at that, I always think back to the whole notion of we should lift up the name of Jesus, and Jesus will do the rest. So we can't take anybody where they don't want to go. But people can't make informed decisions unless they know about the way maker. And so it's our job to lift up Jesus, and he will draw all men unto him.
I can't emphasize enough again that everything that we do in ministry, hospitality is a form of evangelism. Ushering is a form of evangelism. The gatekeepers, the first people that people meet as they come through the church. The person that you're sitting next to is an evangelist. Lord help us if it's a person that doesn't want you sitting on their pew, or rolling their eyes because you're crossing over them or something like that. So we really, sometimes we think that an evangelist is just a particular person, but we are all walking, talking advertisements for the Lord. And so when Elton Brown says that we take people where they did not plan to go, what I read or heard there was, I remember when I really heard the Lord. You couldn't have never told me that was going to happen to me, and I can remember seeing the spark in others' eyes when I've been testifying. I'm sure they weren't expecting that. So I think for me personally, I kind of think that it means that's kind of what it means. You're not intentionally trying to do anything in particular, but something happens. Have you ever shared a testimony with someone, you all were talking, and then you wondered, I don't know why I told you that.
Yes.
That's nothing but Jesus. That person, whether they said it or not, they needed to hear that story that you shared. And the Holy Spirit knew that you were the one to meet that need.
That's right.
And they might just look at you like, oh my God, I can't believe they just spoke in my spirit like that. Feel like the woman at the well. How did you know I had 6 husbands? Amen.
And you said it take you where you didn't think you want to go. Because when I told people, I said I was just going to church that day. And they had asked me to speak one time on the pulpit about, it was Bishop's birthday. And I told Bishop, I said, I don't remember what you preached. I said, but I remember what Tinker sang. And she sang Kurt Carr's song, I Almost Gave Up. That was evangelizing. I was right at the edge of a breakthrough and I couldn't see it. So it comes through the radio, it comes through the the musical instruments.
When I first started attending Grace, different people were visiting. And so there was this one woman, and she recognized me from my professional career before I became a minister. And she says, oh, you're X, Y, Z, and you can do this and that and the other for this church. And so I said, well, I've left that behind and I've moved into something else. So we went into the sanctuary, and the music was particularly stirring that day. And you all know me, I'll get up on my feet and clap and dance and do whatever. And she was just looking at me. She says, oh, this woman used to be this, and now look at her. And so that was kind of, my life is different now. I didn't have to say a word.
Yeah. Amen.
And I know I always tell the story of how I came to Grace, and to me, it was barbecue smoke going up in the air. It took me a place where I did not plan to go. And, if you come in and meet her, you'll never be the same. I'm like, yeah, right, who's like that? I shook her hand, I'm like, ooh, okay.
You know,
This is the place I want to be.
She was our first member.
Yeah.
Jim and I came to church. We were just going to support Reverend Melody because we knew her from another setting. So we sat through the service and we enjoyed the service, and she offered up the invitation, and before we knew what was happening, we stood up and went to the front and joined, and the rest is history.
And I can tell you about how the devil, he was in the church that day when she had her first service. And that was the plan. We had been communicating over the summer while she was cleaning. And I said, so what do I have to do? And she said, well, when I open up the doors of the church, just walk down the aisle and we'll go from there. And I ping her again. So what do I have to do? I came to church. Who else was here? The entire Sauk Village elected officials. And I sat behind them. Do I want to do this in front of these people? I don't want to do this in front. I'm not going to do it. She opened up the doors of the church and I floated. I don't remember people, what they said or what they did, but I did that day. So I'm not going to sit in this seat. I couldn't sit in my seat. So evangelism reaches you all kinds of ways, you know.
And you don't even have to, all you have to do is just be in your proper place. You don't have to change. You know, some people, when you get in the presence of certain people, you want to change and things like that. You don't have to do any of those things. Just be in the proper place and let God do the work.
Yeah, I remember after a 10-year absence or just a visitor in church, you know, when my kids were doing something because my mother was taking them to church, and I was always there. But I was trying to find myself, and it was taking me about 10 years. And so my mom announced that she was no longer going to take our kids to church, that both of us, my husband, then that we were raised in church, and shame on us. And so I thought, she's just playing. She's going to take them. First Sunday passed, she didn't come. Second Sunday, I said, oh, Lord, she's serious. And I didn't want my kids not to have what I had, you know. So anyway, we talked again about going back to Trinity and different things, and so nothing ever happened. So my mom says, look, for Mother's Day, I just want one thing. I want my girls to go to church with me. I was like, oh, Lord, here she going again. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out. I think I get a cold coming on. But anyway, I wind up going to a little bitty church in Robbins, and the pastor was preaching from the Esther text. I will never forget that. And that was a good 25 years ago or something like that. I still don't know to this day what it was about Esther and Naomi that made me get up and walk that aisle. I didn't plan to go there.
Right.
I was simply obliging my mother, but the Lord knew. The Lord knew.
Oh, yeah.
And to this day, every once in a while when I think about that Esther passage, I don't know what it was, other than it was just my time to make that walk. So, amen. So if you look in your booklet, on page 11 for session 3, community, under approaching the theme, option 2, there are some questions. The first question says, what does community mean? What does community mean? because we haven't watched the video, so I'm not sure why they say them. What does community mean?
People in a certain location living similarly,
Or a group, or sharing the same common things in common. So like a faith community, African American community, a gay and lesbian community, whatever that particular community is.
I think whatever you surround yourself around, so church community,
Right.
your job, that you work, your home,
Yeah, when people share something in common.
Right.
And you're right, it varies depending upon where you are.
so you could be members of many communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you can be members of many communities, but what are the key ingredients of being in community? And that is, I think, the sharing. I think all of you all pretty much said that. It's the sharing of whatever those ideals are, whatever that goal is that you're supposed to be meeting. So the next question says, have they been able to find, and so this they is you all, been able to find strength or support in community in their own lives? And if so, what are some examples? Have you been able to find strength and support in the communities that you have frequented?
Back in 2013 through 2015, there was a gang war going on in and around my community. And so young people were getting shot. There were drive-bys and unintended victims were getting wounded. And so we had passed these same people on the street driving our cars, not noticing them. But when the shootings began, we somehow decided, without talking to each other, to bond together. So we would go out the front door and start speaking to each other, and we would watch. If somebody was going out to their car, we would watch until they got into their car. So we started giving more attention to the people in that setting. And so I think that was a way of us bonding for support, to show strength in the community and support for each other.
We all share a common goal for the good of everyone.
Anybody else a particular example of how you found strength or support in the community? Whichever work, community, whatever.
I was going to use work as an example, where there's over 15,000 people globally. So, of course, your employer has a mission statement that says this is what we are about and this is our culture. So, belonging to work, there is an expected culture that you're supposed to adapt to. But even within that, within your own department, there is yet another culture. So you belong to many, many communities, but we have to keep our eyes focused on the one who is head of everything.
Yeah, Jim?
Since I come from a criminal justice background, one of the things that I learned early on is that the police department, the community, determines the type of police department it has. And it does that because it selects the leadership of that department. And therefore, and because of that leadership, that department then he begins to articulate what the shared values are that the community selected him for. So things like some agencies concentrate more on traffic enforcement. Some agencies will do more community service things, like if your car breaks down, they'll get out of the car and do that, while others don't have time to do that type of thing. So there are vast differences in the types of police services that are provided because of the leadership that was placed in there by the community. Okay.
I'm on the board of directors of our townhome association, and one thing that really strengthens us as a community is that we pride ourselves in making sure that the aesthetics of our community outshines anything else, and everybody in our township recognizes our community because we pride ourselves in, you know, the upkeep of our community.
Definitely you do, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And the community does not have to be a localized place, because I know when I traveled for the government, I went to Michigan and Indianapolis and Minnesota, and the community were the saints that I dealt with, which we didn't we didn't start, we just started about doing the government's business. But in a lot of instances, we departed with talking about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And so that was community, you know. And so I look forward to, and I didn't see these people but every 6 months, but I look forward to seeing them when I got there, and they looking forward to seeing me too. So when I was about to retire, I told them, I may have told you guys this, and they said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to be about my Father's business. So somebody said, your father have a business? I'm like, yeah, he's got a business.
Riches and, all right.
I say the church first.
Yep.
Because we're building up each other, providing opportunities for the children, providing opportunities for each other. And, you know, if somebody would have told me that I'd be where I'm at right now, I'd like, no.
Not.
But I am, and it's because of the help and the nurturing of, you know, those whom I surround myself with. So.
I can certainly think of many, many examples of how I found strength and support in the community. I can remember as a young mother and a young divorcee, single parent, and how who I guess other people will consider them to be the riffraff of the community, but they were the ones that would sit on my porch while I helped them with their homework and all that kind of stuff. And so whenever my kids were doing something they weren't supposed to, they were going to come and tell it. And my kids were just, you know, baffled by the idea of the things that they were doing, and then they had the nerve to tell on them. I said, because they know what I expect. So, I mean, I've received it in that regard. And recently, I had come home one Thursday, and I usually try to get straight home so that I can decompress. I needed to decompress when I left in order to come and be here for the next leg, which, you know, would be Bible study. Obviously, I was so tired that I did not close my garage. And so I crashed. And I heard a doorbell ring. And I was trying to figure out, who is ringing my doorbell? I didn't get up to answer it. I couldn't move. I was just that fatigued. Then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. You know how you're kind of leery of answering phone calls that you don't recognize, so I didn't respond. But the person left a voice message. So I said, well, let me check this. It was a neighbor directly across from me. I didn't know he had my phone number. He called to tell me that my garage door was open. I was in there knocked out. And you know, most times you don't lock the door.
To the garage.
Exactly. I said, oh, Jesus. So that was nothing but Jesus, but also it was the support and of the neighborhood, the community. So, okay, anyone else? So we've kind of discussed that last question, what would be ideal community? For each of us, we've given an example. Aesthetics, so that it's pleasing and it's inviting, people want to be there. It's looking out for each other. You know, when you see, wait a minute, that doesn't look good, or here's a dangerous situation. We don't even have to communicate with one another. We know that we need to watch each other as we're getting in the cars. We need to be looking out the window to make sure everything is okay. Nurturing, you know, helping people realize things they never thought, you know, could happen. So that's I would venture to say would be our ideal community. Well, let's go on to the passage, which is Esther. Hey. Esther, I didn't pick this. It's in here. So I'll put the Message translation in your reading today. So how about this? Why don't I have someone read first paragraph, which is on the page 1. And Lori, would you read that first
Sure.
paragraph?
Okay.
Juanita, would you read the second one, which would be verses 9 through 11? And Jerry, would you read 12 through 14?
Okay. Esther called to Hatshepsut, one of the royal eunuchs whom the king had assigned to wait on her, and told him to go to Mordecai and get the full story of what was happening. So Hatshepsut went to Mordecai in the town square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him. He also told him the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to deposit in the royal bank to finance the massacre of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the bulletin that had been posted in Susa, ordering the massacre so he could show it to Esther when he reported back with instructions to go to the king and intercede and plead with him for her people.
Hatshepsut came back and told Esther everything Mordecai had said. Esther talked it over with Hatshepsut and then sent him back to Mordecai with this message. Everyone who works for the king here, and even the people out in the provinces, knows that there is a single fate for every man or woman who approaches the king without being invited: death. The one exception is if the king extends his gold scepter, then he or she may live. And it's been 30 days now since I've been invited to come to the king.
When Hatshepsut told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai sent her this message. Don't think that just because you live in the king's house, you're the one Jew who will get out of this alive. If you persist in staying silent at a time like this, help and deliverance will arrive for the Jews from someplace else, but you and your family will be wiped out. Who knows? Maybe you were made queen for such a time as this. Esther sent back her answer to Mordecai. Go and get all the Jews living in Susa together. Fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, either day or night. I and my maids will fast with you. If you will do this, I'll go to the king, even though it's forbidden. If I die, I die. Mordecai left and carried out Esther's instructions.
Man, I remember our Bible study series that we did on Esther.
Amen. Amen. This is all of the Bible readers in DC ought to read this. Don't think that just because you live in Pennsylvania Avenue, the one Republic, who will get out of this alive. Lord, let me start. You can hear that part, right? Let's go on. Anyway, how did Esther respond to what was happening in this community? She had at least 2 responses.
At first, she didn't think it was everything she could do because it was not proper for her to just ask for an audience with her husband. Check that.
You had to be invited.
Yes.
The first thing you have to consider the situation. She considered everything and gave it thorough, complete thought.
She did.
See, a lot of times we do things without thinking. We just do. And when a lot of times, when I mentor young men, one thing I always tell them is that just because you think something, that does not mean that it's right. So we have to give things, we have to give it good thought. And the Lord's, that's the discernment from the Lord.
And along with what Gregory just said, she solicited the support of the household community. She asked people to fast for her, to stand in agreement with her so they could have better discernment
Mhm.
about what to do. So she didn't make this decision by
That's
herself.
right.
And also, and this is what I really like about this story, Esther had not revealed what her ethnicity was. The king did not know that she was a Jew. So Mordecai said, don't think that just because you live in the king's house,
You passing.
you passing, that you live in the king's house, you're the one Jew who will get out of this alive, because once he finds out.
God has no respect of person.
Right.
There was a lot of people became involved that was not Jews. We had the eunuch, we had the maidens, and God brought everybody into the play, made everybody a part of the community
Mm-hmm.
with one common goal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that goes into the next question. So,
Okay.
Esther's response was fear or feeling like overwhelmed that it was impossible for her to do. And that's kind of similar to how we sometimes feel about evangelizing and spreading the word of Jesus. That, oh, these people are not going to listen, or this is too much. I don't think I can do this. This is too many people, or it's, we're not going to ever get anybody to hear. And so she was initially thinking in the physical,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she thought it through, but initially her first response was in the physical. Well, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this,
Mhm.
Yes,
I did that.
yeah, right.
What are the consequences?
Self-preservation.
Exactly.
If I do that, then I'm gonna die, So sometimes in communities, when there are things that need to be done, that's what we usually go through. I mean, that's decisions many times in general. It takes time to go right to the spiritual part of it. Your humanness will crop up. Then after Esther put that on her mind, that don't think that just because you've had it easy and you passed and all of that, that you're going to be safe from this, because that's not necessarily the case. And if you don't do this, the Lord will have somebody else to do it. And then she thought on the spiritual realm. Okay, I got this, but I need you all to do this. So, like you said, she didn't do it in isolation. So then she went from her own solitary defense for why she couldn't do it to engaging the community to give her the strength that she needed, in order to do it.
And she stopped thinking about herself and did things for the greater good.
Absolutely.
Like if I die, I die.
But a lot of times that's what we do. That's where the fear comes in. We're only thinking about ourselves and not the greater good, which is that excitement that should happen. Yeah. And so relationships are very important. The relationship of the eunuch to be able to be the mouthpiece between she and Mordecai, so that she could keep that her identity concealed. Mordecai being that voice of reasoning, that voice that was able to convict her spirit. Everybody needed Mordecai. To call you on the carpet about what you're trying to escape from, or to put you on notice. What are you representing here? What are you supposed to be doing? And so, and then the community that fasted. That's some power there. All these people sacrificing on your behalf so that you can take a stand that could mean death for you.
And it also could have been death for them
them,
also, because they were Jews.
They were,
And they knew Mordecai was her uncle, so she evidently was a Jew. Mordecai, you know how you read these stories? Well, I started at 3 because I couldn't get it together from 4 to 5 right. And Haman, he was 46. Haman wanted the power. And so he said, well, let's kill all these Jews, because Mordecai would not bow down to him, which is what the king wanted him to do. And he was like under no circumstances. And then when he said kill the Jews, Mordecai was mortified.
Mortified, that's weird.
He walked around in the ashes, he wallowed in the ashes, and the queen, she said, go find out what's wrong with him.
Right. Yeah.
It was just so many things that brought that thing. I'm like, this is so
Yeah, he was really going through.
Yeah.
But not for himself,
Right.
for his people,
We're his people.
because of the stand that he took. I think we were talking about that in Sunday
And
school a
Sunday
couple
school.
weeks ago. Taking those stands sometimes is not just about you, but it's about everybody else. Ultimately, it worked out for everybody, but it was so many chances that people had to take, because the king could have said, "Oh no, you a Jew? Oh snap! I'm gonna start with you first."
So in
I
Sunday
mean,
school, we did the
yeah.
Daniel thing. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Daniel had to go
Absolutely.
before the king and
Absolutely,
save himself and
absolutely.
his friends.
So let us go on to the video, because it is this is a little bit longer than the ones we've watched before, and we want to listen very carefully as they have this discussion about community, and then we'll go into the questions that they have in the book.
Okay, I think at this point, it would be helpful if we talk a little bit about what does it mean to do evangelism in the 21st century, because I think that takes on a very different context than it did in the last century, in the 20th century. I know from my own perspective in my community of faith, one of the biggest challenges that we face with local congregations is when it comes to evangelism, the word evangelism, the E word, does not scare them, not in general. The biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges we face is that we have a 20th century mindset, a 20th century context of doing evangelism. And I think if we're going to continue to be effective for Christ's church in the 21st century, we have to bring bring our evangelism into the 21st century. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, what does it mean to do evangelism in the 21st century? What does that look like? And maybe even more important than that, is evangelism an activity the church ought to be engaged in the 21st century? And if so, why? I like to share a story of my own about what one congregation, what evangelism looks like in their context. This is a congregation I've been working with now for 4 or 5 years, and when I first started working with them, had a very classic view of evangelism in the 20th century. And one of the first things I had to convince him of, because the whole reason that I got to them is that they wanted to solidify their future. You know, they wanted to be a 21st century church. They wanted to, we're talking about a congregation that's over 100 years old, and they wanted to at some point to say, hey, we've been in the business of Christ for 200 years. Why do we do that? How do we reach that? And so that's how my relationship began with them. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is one of the things that I had to help them come to see is, okay, if we're going to do evangelism in a 21st century context, 2 things that we're gonna have to take seriously. One is we're gonna have a context for what vision is now and what that looks like. Okay, vision meaning long term, and then we have to have a context to what our mission is. Mission being short term, as we're moving toward our vision. To make a long story short, this is now a congregation that has taken mission in their community seriously. They're doing things now that they never would have 5 years ago. I mean, you could not have paid them to do some of the things that they're doing now. And it's about relationship. You know, it's about not come join us. It's about what can we do for you.
Susan called me about 10 months ago. She's a parishioner, to tell me that her next door neighbor, who they've got a good relationship with, that he had been in their backyard weeping because his marriage was falling apart. And Susan told me that she prayed with him, which sort of, really? That's cool. That's very cool, because Susan is very quiet. Faith is real for Susan, but you wouldn't guess she's not a Bible flogger by any means. And she called me because, not to get a pat on the back, but to warn me that she told the next door neighbor, you really should talk to Peter. I'm sure he talked to you. You should talk to Peter. And about 12 minutes later, I got a phone call from the next door neighbor. Next door neighbor hasn't been in church in 20 years. Dropped out as a teenager. And for the last 10 months, he's been in church almost every Sunday. I think that's sort of what evangelism looks like in the 21st century. It's built on relationship. These two neighbors had relationship, had connection. The neighbor knew that Susan and her husband were people of faith, although they didn't have big signs, but they just knew they're people of faith. When he was in crisis, who do I go talk to? I go talk to my friends, my neighbor. My neighbor might have some faith connection. And the door opens. Susan saw an opportunity not to shove the gospel, but to say, I've got something I can give, care, I can pray with you. I think that's what evangelism looks like in the 21st century. It's not about a program. And I'm not sure you can teach the Susans of the world in a workshop how to do that. It's as you go. It's part of living it. It's part of having this integrated into their lives.
So instead of us wanting them to come to us, we are going to them with our relationships, whatever those relationships may be, professional or otherwise. They are simply either a relative or a friend or a neighbor or a person you sit next to and get to know, that kind of thing. And it builds on a relationship rather than starting with an argument or with a judgment or something of that nature. It starts with the relationship. Is that what's different about the 20th century evangelism, that it built more on relationships than in the past, or is it just the same thing?
Yeah, or an agenda. I want to add on an agenda where my agenda is I want you to come and join my church for whatever reason.
Exactly.
You know, I also think, Pete, I like that story because I think that gets right at it. But I also think that goes back to what Bruce said earlier and what Heather said earlier about the relationships. You said about come join us, you know, is that, and as Peter was talking, what came to my mind was for disciples now, it's just disciples, it may be true of other faith communities as well, but I can speak for disciples. Too many of our congregations still have the context of evangelism of knocking on doors, okay? And what you're talking about is very different, very, very different.
I think we talk about how to do it. I think we have to be grounded in our faith practices. We have to know the story in order to go out and tell the story. So I think we need to be grounded in Scripture, be grounded in our prayer lives, be grounded in service and those other faith practices so we know how to do it and why we're doing it is critical to me. In service and those other faith practices so we know how to do it and why we're doing it is critical to me. Did any of you notice that the people sitting around the table belong to different churches?
Yes.
Yeah, amen, amen. That certainly adds to an interesting conversation. So, where they paused for a moment, we decided to just go on because that is the first question. Is evangelism an activity the church should be engaged in? Why or why not? And prior to that, he talked about moving away from 20th century ways of evangelizing to the 21st century, and it occurred to me, and I guess I hadn't even considered just how many years the 20th century was comprised of, or any century is. So we're talking about from the 1900s, you know, on down to 1999. And so that is like, my goodness, you know, that's when our great somebody's were around. So you know that there has to be something different happening now because life was very different at the beginning of the century, you know? And so there's really no comparison in many, many ways. So I got that part. But he said something interesting. Is evangelism an activity the church should be engaged in? Why or why not?
Yes.
Okay.
And we are the church, each of us individually. So, as individuals and as a whole, we should be engaged in soul winning. That's our our purpose. One of our purposes.
To bring all
bring
naked women unto thee.
Yes.
I think we should be evangelists because that's what the Bible tells us. And that's one of the things, the Great Commission
Right, absolutely.
instructs us to go and go out into the world and bring people to the
Spread the good news.
and you know what happens when you talk about the 21st century, we live in a time when it's many new ways to reach people because I see people with different flyers. A lady gave me a check one time and it had like eight scriptures on it about paid in full and all that stuff. How long was the check good for? It was everlasting. You know, just all kind of ways. And you know, and sometimes we have to remove ourselves from traditions. You know what? We can evangelize in this day and time without diluting the word of God. Because sometimes I remember when I was a little one, and the pastor would always talk about that every service was like somebody was going to hell, and you know what? And I'd be sitting up in there actually, you know, shaking in my boots, you know, and things like that. So this day and age, I just think the modern day church, the first thing you have to do is get them in the door. If you get them in the door, then God will do the rest.
I don't think they're with the camera phones and everything, you can see a lot of it, just like the guy that gave the man the boots on the train. He was evangelized.
Right.
There's a lot of folks that was in awe of this and probably thought, I need to be doing something.
Yes.
You know, I think I've heard some preach in season and out of season, sometimes open your mouth.
Right.
And we think of evangelism as being something grand that we have to do, and it's not grand. Anything that you do to help or speak or have compassion for another person is evangelism to me.
I don't believe the man on the bus, was it the bus or the L?
It was
The
on the
L
L.
train.
I don't believe the man on the L spoke the name of Jesus at all, but
No.
he modeled the principles that Jesus taught us.
Mm-hmm.
Love, peace, unity, justice, those kinds of things. And I'm sure that man's heart changed
Yeah, exactly.
because,
And a lot of people
because of
around.
what he did.
Yes, because a woman brought it to the attention of the news people. She had witnessed it, you know.
But that guy had nothing to say about it. Someone else videotaped what he did. He didn't do it for notoriety or to be recognized by it. He just said, I have an extra. He said he had just bought those shoes and they were like $180. He had just bought them and he gave it to him and he took the ones out of his bag and put them on his feet. He could have taken the ones out of the bag and given it to the man. He said, no, you take these.
So maybe they were there for just such a time as
Such a
this.
time as this.
When I think about 20th century evangelism, I think about when you think about going from 1900 to 1999, I think I could see it being simpler back then. And then all of a sudden folks getting all sophisticated with it. And then I think this is a time where we need to come back to the simplicity of just modeling Jesus.
And you know what, modern technology has made it so easy just to reach out to somebody. I see people all the time, like my brother, him and his people, they send a Bible verse every morning or something, things of that nature. So all it is just making people aware, you know. And then just like, cause a lot of people, they don't have nowhere to turn to. Just like a lot of folks, they think the only, you know what, they think when they go to the club on Saturday night, they like, they think that's everything. They don't know. They think that church folks don't have fun, don't have no joy and everything. And I explain to people all the time, say, we church folks have just as much fun as the people at the club. The only difference, we don't have a hangover the next morning. But we are not like, you know, we are not a bunch of sad sacks or a lot of bruised people.
There's some people that are though. Some people are. Oh my goodness. They will take the joy out of Jesus. And so yeah, you're right. And those of us that used to look forward to the Friday night parties, we definitely have another perspective that we can present to people. And so the other thing they talked about is why do you think that those people emphasize the importance of having relationships without an agenda or without making them join us? So the guy gave an example of this lady who was kind of quiet and nobody would really even know that she knew the Lord or anything, and how her neighbor was going through a divorce or some kind of marital problems, and that she prayed for him. And so they were saying that, but he said something interesting, and I hope I heard this correctly. He said she prayed, she wasn't sharing the gospel. And I didn't necessarily, if that's what he said, I didn't necessarily agree with that. I think that prayer is sharing the gospel. She needed to know the gospel in order to pray. And so, but anyway, any other, comments about what they said in terms of how evangelism should look and what things we need to consider when we are evangelizing?
Well, at the turn of the 19th century and even before then and into the 20th century, there was one way that was considered right, and everyone was expected to get with that program. If you didn't, then there were consequences. For Christians, that consequence was you going to hell. Now, we're trying to reach out to people on the margins. We're trying to hear more voices and be voices for those who haven't had a voice in the past. And so we have to meet the people where they are. Instead of forcing them to come to us in our rigid ways, we need to go out there. And we need to stand in solidarity with people around those broad principles that I mentioned before: love, peace, justice, unity, whatever that takes. So I think those are some basic differences.
I did listen to the guy explain about this woman and the neighbor, and what I heard was the guy must have shared something about his marriage being on the rocks. And she didn't go to him saying, well, you got to go to Jesus and, here's some scripture for you. And she prayed about his welfare and hopes that things would get better for him. I don't have any advice for you, but I'm going to call my pastor and let him know that you should give him a call and get some help. So that's what I heard. So when she was praying about his welfare and the loss that he was feeling. I don't think she was talking about, this is what Jesus said to do and you do this and you do that. She wasn't preaching to him. I think she was praying about his welfare and offered someone to talk to him. And so I thought that was very powerful.
And if you can demonstrate calm in the midst of turmoil, people will look at you, well, why are you so calm? What's that all about? And then you start easing them into why you have peace, the source of your peace.
And we talked about evangelize without an agenda. People don't want to feel like they're boxed in. And the Holy Spirit God doesn't want us to be, but He wants you to freely. It's a choice. He wants you to make that choice. He doesn't want anybody to bully you into it.
Absolutely. Get you over here with a lunchbox.
I don't think Jesus is being like honey. And we're the little bees and we're just drawn to them, because if you get a taste of them, you're gonna stay right there
The
with
old
them.
taste and see.
Yeah, taste and see.
And you know what, we are concerned with people seeing the God in us. When we overlook the God in them, they may not be, they may not look like us or have the things that we have, but that does not mean that that's not enough reason for the overlook. Cause we walk past people all the time like they're not even there.
So I think, you know, that particular question is more of a 21st century and 20th century. So certainly if evangelism was primarily people knocking on doors or passing out tracts, you know, with scripture and inviting you only, you know, to their church and all of that, then that's more of what was done in the 20th century. I don't think that we need to escape or deny all of those things because they all have their place. But the whole thing about having relationships, building relationships, and not having an agenda, you know, when you approach somebody, you know, like you said, you know, pulling out the Bible and giving them scriptures and do you know the Lord and the pardon of your sins. You know, everybody want to hear that.
And they might not understand all that church speak anyway. What does that mean?
Exactly.
I think like jamming for Jesus
Yes.
was evangelism.
Right, exactly.
Because we invited the community in with no agenda,
Right.
you know,
Share
but
the
to
warmth.
share.
Yeah, share the warmth.
And I thought about us on Halloween, right? They saw what we had as a relationship with our church. They saw the members' strong feelings for each other in that space. I got everything like, you guys are like family. You're like family. I'm like, we are family. So people see it. Do they break down the doors to get here to experience it? But they know it.
Someone brought some flyers about grace to that Halloween party.
Yes.
And there were folks who would pick up the flyers and go from table to table and pass them out, but without saying too much. And that was just a simple act of evangelism. I have gone to lunch with friends who are actively involved in evangelism. They don't say a whole lot, but they have these little flyers about their church and their activities that their church is engaged in. And when they leave the tip for the waitress, they'll leave the flyer with the tip. And so that's a way of evangelizing as well. Just little printed materials. They don't have to be tracts.
And they may not be interested in right then taking home and putting on a dress and keep walking past and then all of a sudden read it. Yeah.
Has somebody ever shared information with you that you took kind of just out of feeling, well, hi, okay, thank you. And then later on something happened and you needed that. And you're tearing the house up trying to remember where you put whatever that is. So that's the same thing with what we do. You know, we can either pass out something tangible that talks about our church, or we can just be the church. And when people are going through or they need or feel, they will reach out to you and ask you, do you go to church? You know, what I'm gathering as we go along in this is that in the 21st century, we have to really do more. And then something else that kind of popped up, they said it's not about you joining as it is, what can we do for you? You know, what need can we meet? Mr. G said to me that a while back when I was talking about this whole evangelism before we even got the materials or anything, I said we've got to do some more things. And he said that when he would go out, they would ask people, is there something I can pray for you for? Now, you know, that's something. That is something when not many people, most people are just going to give you something. They don't ask you, can I pray for something for you? And then seriously do that. You know, do you want me to know your name? You know, that kind of thing. So I thought, wow, that was great.
I've heard people around this table describe encounters they've had in parking lots with people who have come up to them asking for money or whatever. And most of those stories involved us getting the name of the person and having them to describe their situation, and even saying, may I pray with you or for you, and what do you need? So I think we're doing that, and we weren't really calling it evangelism, but doing it anyway.
And I think, oh, go ahead, Bev.
My daughter sent me, and I'm not a not a social media person at all, okay? But my daughter sent a post, a Facebook post from a girlfriend. Actually, it was she has a GoFundMe, a childhood friend of hers that I knew when she was growing up, that now lives down in Carbondale, was doing a GoFundMe to provide personal hygiene products for homeless women. And at the end of her explanation, now she was looking to raise was $500 so that she could make these glam pad packages for the ladies, homeless women, and she had scripture at the bottom of the post, and I said, I gotta pass this on because this is evangelism, you know. So.
Amen. Again, thank you for that. Again, if nothing else, if we don't take anything else from this, it's important that we understand that everything that we do, even our just sitting with someone, is a form of evangelism. There are no people who are specially anointed just for that purpose. Esther had no idea for such a time as this, and for many of us in our lives, we will all find ourselves in a for such a time as this, where we are expected somehow to not only stand up for the community, but to rally the community around that common good, that common goal. And so thus far we've talked about the fears of evangelism, and last week we talked about the excitement. And tonight we have attempted to talk about what it means to be in community, how the community has been important in our own faith journeys, and our support and our strength. And so we are so grateful once again for another night, and as God continues to feed our spirits about who we are as the people and the Great Commission. I'm like Greg, I think it's impossible to not go out and spread the good news, but we do have to know how to do it. And it's not fair to assume that everybody should hear it the same way. And so we bless God for that opportunity. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight. If you are without a church home, we so invite you to come to Grace United Church of Christ, but there's no pressure. We appreciate your attendance here via the World Wide Web. We are so grateful for your support. Please extend a note to us to let us know if there is some other topic that we can cover during Bible study that will be helpful for your growth in the Lord. God bless you, and